Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're tackling one of the biggest questions out there. What's right and what's wrong? But we're not going to look at it through the lens of philosophy. Nope. We're going to treat it like a biological phenomenon. We're going to peel back the layers of our own intuitions to see the surprising machinery ticking away underneath. All right, let's dive right in with a classic puzzle that immediately shows how weird our moral intuitions can be. You've probably heard of the trolley problem, right? A runaway trolley is about to kill 5 people. You can pull a lever to divert it, but if you do, it'll kill one person on a different track. Most people say they'd pull the lever. But what about this? You're a doctor. You have 5 patients who are all going to die without an organ transplant. A perfectly healthy person walks in for a checkup. Should you harvest their organs to save the 5? Almost everyone gives a hard, immediate no. And this is what's so fascinating, right? The core logic, the math, is identical in both cases. Sacrifice 1 life to save 5. Yet our gut reaction to pulling a lever feels worlds apart from the horror of the organ harvesting scenario. This huge conflict shows us that our moral compass isn't just guided by pure logic. Something else is going on. So, to solve this mystery, we're going to go on a little investigation, broken down into 6 parts. We'll start with the puzzle itself, then use a thought experiment to try and find a more rational path. After that, we'll dig into the deep evolutionary origins of our behavior, and finally, we'll try to piece together a whole new framework for understanding ethics itself. Okay, so our first stop is to just really sit with this problem. The fact that our intuitions about the trolley and the organ donor are so wildly different, even with the same outcome, that's our central clue. It tells us that our sense of right and wrong is messy, it's emotional, and frankly, it can seem pretty illogical. So how do we get past our messy feelings to find a clearer answer? Well, let's try a thought experiment, one that's designed to force a purely rational choice by stripping away all that immediate emotional stuff. Okay, imagine this. 3 people are stranded on a remote lunar station. It turns out 2 of them have been accidentally poisoned and they're going to die from kidney failure. The station's medical robot can save them, but there's a catch. It can only do it by sacrificing the 3rd healthy person for a transplant. Now, before they make any kind of agreement, just think about the odds. The situation is pretty grim. If they just let fate run its course, every single person on that station has a 2 in 3 chance of dying. Not great odds. But what if they make a pact before they know who is healthy? What if they all agree that should this ever happen, the healthy one will be sacrificed to save the other 2? Well, if they do that, they instantly change their own personal odds. Suddenly, each person's chance of dying is cut in half, down to just 1 in 3. From a purely self-interested point of view, making that pact is the only logical move. And this is a brilliant illustration of a concept from the philosopher John Rawls called the veil of ignorance. The whole idea is that the most ethical system is the one you choose if you had no idea what your place in it would be. Behind that veil, your own rational self-interest actually forces you to pick what's best for the largest number of people. Because hey, you might just end up being any one of them. But why does our intuition in the real world fight so hard against this kind of cold logic? I mean, really fight it. To understand that, we need to zoom out. Way, way out. We need to look at where our intuitions actually came from. We have to go all the way back to the very beginning of life itself. So 4 billion years ago, something incredible happened. Molecules popped up that could make copies of themselves. And for eons, they just copied. And sometimes those copies had little mistakes, mutations. The replicators that got better at copying themselves, well, they became more common. And that's pretty much it. Everything, from birdsong to our deepest sense of justice, is just a downstream effect of this simple chemical process. As the biologist Richard Dawkins so brilliantly put it, evolution doesn't really care about the survival of the species, or even you as an individual. The fundamental unit of selection is the gene. Genes that build organisms programmed to do things that get those very genes copied, those are the genes that stick around. It's like they're selfishly trying to replicate themselves. And this brings us to a huge question. If the main driver of evolution is just genetic self-interest, then where in the world does altruism come from? Why do we see animals, and especially us humans, sacrificing for each other? It really seems like a paradox, doesn't it? Well, the answer is that what looks like pure selflessness is actually 2 incredibly clever strategies for those selfish genes. First, there's kin altruism. Helping your kids or your siblings isn't really selfless from a gene's perspective. You're just helping to make sure copies of your own genes survive.
Then there's reciprocal altruism. You scratch my back, I'll scratch yours. In small, stable groups, helping others is a fantastic long-term investment.
And to manage all these complex social deals, our brains evolved a whole suite of emotions. Gratitude makes us want to reward people who help us. Guilt is a signal to others that, hey, you can trust me, I'll pay back my debts. And moral outrage, that's what motivates us to punish anyone who tries to cheat the system. These feelings are basically the software that runs our cooperative hardware. But here is the major twist. This software, it was written for a totally different world, a world of small, tight-knit hunter-gatherer bands. So what happens when you run that ancient software in our modern world of 8 billion strangers, where you might help someone you will never, ever see again? You get what Richard Dawkins calls a lust to be nice. Our instinct to cooperate, which was once a purely rational strategy for genetic survival, now it just misfires. It becomes this general, sometimes totally irrational drive to be good to people, even when there is zero chance they'll ever pay us back. A perfect way to think about this is the cuckoo bird. The cuckoo lays its egg in another bird's nest. Now that host bird is running on a simple genetic rule. If you see an egg in your nest, take care of it. It's a rule that usually helps its own genes survive, but the cuckoo totally exploits it. In a way, our modern society is like a giant cuckoo's nest for our ancient instincts. Our drive to be helpful gets triggered in all sorts of situations our genes never could have planned for. So, what does all of this mean for our original puzzle with the trolley and the doctor? Well, understanding the biological origin of our ethics gives us a really powerful new tool. It lets us demystify moral debates by taking them apart and seeing the different pieces. The key here is to separate two different things. First, you have your goals. What do we fundamentally want? Let's say we all agree our goal is a world with less suffering. These are our core preferences, and they're totally subjective. Then you have your strategies. What is the best way to achieve less suffering? Now, this part can be objective. We can use facts and evidence to argue about which policy works better. Most ethical arguments get so messy because we mix up our subjective goals with our objective strategies. This framework also solves a really old problem in philosophy. You can't get an ought from an is. You can't just look at the world as it is and then derive a rule for how it ought to be. But once we realize an ought statement isn't a claim about objective reality, but is just an expression of a preference, the whole problem just dissolves. You shouldn't kill is just a very powerful way of saying I have a really, really strong preference for a world where people don't kill each other. And this biological view really helps us sidestep some of the paradoxes in other ethical systems. For instance, instead of thinking of morality as just an expression of pure emotion, like we're all just shouting, boo, murder, it reframes it as a clear statement of preference. And that just aligns so much better with everything we can actually observe in the natural world. So, in the end, ethics isn't about discovering some universal law that's written into the fabric of the cosmos. It's about understanding ourselves, our evolved, subjective, and sometimes contradictory preferences. It helps clarify our debates and forces us to be honest about what we're actually arguing for. And once you accept that, the only real question left to answer is a personal one. What kind of world do you, a beautiful accident of genetic history, actually prefer?